What's up, everybody? And today we're checking out, could the US military conquer the UK if it wanted to? This is by Binkov's Battlegrounds. I will leave a link down below to the original video. Go and check out the OG video, give it a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'm going to go into this and say, yes, it could. Yes, it could. As a former Royal Marines commando, that makes me very sad because I would like the UK to be stronger. But as a UK and a US citizen, I'm not that worried, to be honest with you. But let's watch it. Let's find out what he's got to say.
We all know US and UK are close allies, and that US armed might is far greater than that of UK. But just for argument's sake, and to learn what sort of limitations waging warfare across the ocean implies, this video will explore US invading the United Kingdom.
I could tell you right now, right, the biggest thing is logistically getting everything to the UK. But there is a country right next to us that hates the UK, and that is the Republic of Ireland. And they would be like, hey, US, you're invading Britain? You can put as much stuff on our land as you want.
So, with just the airplanes and ships left to count on, is an invasion over the Atlantic viable?
Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Добро пожаловать в штаб-квартире Binkov.
Welcome to Binkov's HQ. You know,
What? I'm going to skip the ad real quick, okay?
build and fight like a Viking.
There you go.
And now, could US military successfully invade UK if it wanted to? Some rules will apply. US gets no overseas bases, and all other countries are impassable.
Okay.
Distance from US to UK mainland is pretty big, especially when reaching London.
True that.
Before trying to land any troops, the seas must first be clear of British ships, and Royal Air Force must be suppressed. US has a massive advantage when it comes to naval assets.
They have the biggest navy in the world. It's not even close. The US Navy is... It's basically what the British Navy used to be. The British Navy used to dominate the seas. We were by far the biggest, and now the US is even bigger.
Basically, all of its assets are made for oceans and could operate near UK if needed. While the Americans would need to sail to and from Britain, taking weeks away from their actual presence, US Navy could pretty much do whatever it pleases near the UK. It's interesting to point out that most of US ships do not carry anti-ship missiles. US Navy prefers to use their carriers for such missions. British Royal Navy is to go down a similar route. Their Harpoon missiles are old and set to be retired soon. Not all ships have them. Only a minor part of the British fleet has modern air defense systems. Basically, the sea war would be fought above the sea and under it. But
Yeah, at this point, I think that the war would... The Navy would have to put up a good fight, but it would be mostly... the RAF, because the RAF would be landed at bases and getting resupplied and flying out, right?
the British lacked anti-ship missiles for its aircraft. Furthermore, British Tornado aircraft ceased to train for the anti-ship missions almost 2 decades ago. Basically, if UK had to try and do air raids against US fleet, it would be down to 2 weapons:
Let's turn it up a little bit.
laser-guided bombs and short-range tactical missiles. Brimstone in particular might be the weapon of choice. While its warhead is tiny, Brimstone 2 has a decent range. Still, against dozens of potent destroyers designed to deal with many anti-ship missiles at once, it's unlikely UK could do much. British best bet would be their submarines. They're fairly modern. Theoretically, the British could use their ballistic missile subs as attack subs as well, and speed up the entry into service of another astute sub, while keeping one Trafalgar running a bit longer, rummaging for...
Look at them stats right there. Holy. It's mental, isn't it, the difference? 31 Los Angeles attack subs. Holy. 68 in total, and you can't see underneath my head. 11 hypothetical in total. Jeez.
retired sailors to crew it. Still, the British would be far outnumbered.
Yeah.
US submarine fleet dwarfs theirs. Given a bit less time on station and British home advantage when it comes to resupply, the balance of power may not be quite 6-1. Still, it's no question the British subs would get hunted down within months.
I do want to say, this is the good thing about the US, is they're brutally honest with this stuff. The US outnumbers everything with the UK, but they would know that if they were going to go to war with anyone, that they know that the UK would put up a good fight. You know, like you could go to war with Russia, you kind of expect what you're going to expect and all that lot. But for some reason, the UK, they've just got the fight, haven't they? They're up for a fight all the time. And I just know that the US would be like, look, we outnumber them, but just be aware they will bite. They are good fighters. And I think that's why the US and the UK get along so well, isn't it? Is that the US knows that they can rely on the UK. It doesn't have the numbers, but they can rely on the individual soldier to put up the good work. And I think that's why we have such a good connection, is we respect each other's military at the point that we know where they are good, right? The US is good at supplies, at numbers, at financials. Like they're just dominant in every aspect, to the point where it doesn't even matter if the soldiers are that good because they've got the numbers. But the truth is the soldiers are good. And so when you add all that together, the UK is like, listen, we know we'd get our ass handed to us. But at the same time, the UK would be like, we might get our ass handed to us, but we are going to put up a fight 100%. And the US know that would be the case.
Aerial anti-submarine platforms would also play a large role. And while the British could use all their assets, even just the deployable portion of US assets would be enough to force the British subs into hiding.
Yeah.
Furthermore, US carrier-based air power would make it hard for British anti-sub helicopters to operate. The main force projection would be done by US carriers, naturally. US could choose whether to use more carriers initially and then have less available later on, or to maintain a smaller number on constant patrol. To defeat the British Air Force, the former is more likely. US nominally has 11 carriers, but only 9 air wings. It does have an additional support wing, which is a lot bigger. It may be the source of 1 or 2 more combat wings after some months of preparation. But crews aren't the only...
One thing he's not talking about as well is, if this hypothetically did happen, the US and the UK know everything about each other, right? They know all the intricacies. They know where all the bases are because we've been allies for so long. And so if one country was invading the other, if the US was invading the UK, they would know where to hit because they've got the intel. Just like if the UK remarkably had a massive army and invaded the US, we would know where the vulnerable points are because we're allies. It's not got into that. Although, in this instance, I don't think it matters because the power of the US would just overthrow everything in the UK anyway. I think that people don't realize that there would be a tactical part to it where it's not just about the numbers, right? It's also about the US knowing the vulnerable parts of the UK. Do you get what I'm saying?
Issue. Lifespan of a carrier necessarily involves lengthy maintenance periods. Important to note is that the deployable period doesn't mean the carrier can actually be on a mission the whole time. Usually 1 or 2 deployments are made during those 18 months. Missions are usually 6 to 8 months long, and several months are needed to prep the carrier and its wing for another mission.
Yeah.
Shorter missions might give more deployments in the short term, but in the long term, they would require even more maintenance for every month spent out at sea. Because of all that, it's unrealistic US would send out more than 6 carriers at once, after a few months of prep time. Similar issues would affect the aviation assault ships. Perhaps 4 to 6 could be deployed at once, after some preparations. Grand total of combat planes US Navy and Marine Corps could muster in a few months long air
Yeah, but they're not going to get all of them out in one go, are they? 192 F-18s. They wouldn't get that many out that quick. But still, it's a lot.
Is thus smaller than the total number of US planes. US might fly in fresh planes to replace ones that got lost.
It would.
Flying them over the ocean to a carrier would be doable.
Yeah.
What could the British respond with? Royal Air Force is smaller than even the readily available US planes deployed on carriers.
True.
Another huge issue for the British would be
This puppet's hilarious. I love it.
their lack of air defenses. Everything they currently have are fairly low altitude systems.
Yep.
Meaning the US would be free to bomb them from high up with guided weapons. UK would also suffer the US cruise missile barrage. While the Brits have some such missiles of their own, it's unlikely they would be used against the faraway US bases. Even the subs that could carry them would be better utilized for defense of the homeland.
Mm-hmm.
While not all could be launched at once, US could sustain the effort. The British Air Force would be mostly paralyzed on the ground. US has also a much bigger recon platform fleet, especially when it comes to satellites.
Yep.
British lack those, as in the real world they timeshare some US spy satellites. US aircraft
That's the thing, like the two countries are so interconnected, you know?
would be looking for targets as well. Britain would have no real means of scouting the US bases.
Yeah.
US AWACS type planes would be plentiful, while British ones would mostly be trapped on the ground, with runways and highways being mostly inoperative. Thus,
Yeah, if you think about it, the US knows where all the air bases are, and all it takes is a couple of strikes on them air bases to render them useless. At that point, once they've dominated the sky and everything like that, it's all about getting boots on the ground, isn't it?
the Royal Air Force would slowly get destroyed on the ground.
Yeah.
When they would be able to get some planes airborne, they still may not choose to engage the Americans,
Yeah.
as it's likely US attack waves would be made of close to 100 planes with possibly as many fighters as Britain would muster per each local interception, or more.
Yeah.
The best Britain could hope for would be a roughly equal kill ratio in the air,
Yeah.
and when the losses on the ground are included over months of a protracted bombing campaign, US would still be left with a sizable force. All this didn't even include the US Air Force. While the scenario requires it to use the bases inside the US, Britain could be reached. At
Yeah, they could all reach the UK, which is crazy, isn't it, if you think about it?
first, bombers would be deploying cruise missiles, but later on, they would be likely used for bombing missions. But could the Air Force tactical plane fleet help out as well? With very ample in-flight refueling, the answer is yes. US operates the world's biggest air tanker fleet. The Hercules-based tankers, however,
Just think about how bad this would be for the UK. Like, it would be absolutely horrendous. They would have to surrender almost instant. In fact, they would surrender before the Navy's even compromised. So we wouldn't even get to this point.
are too small and would use most of the fuel just to get near Britain. Still, the remainder of the fleet has a substantial fuel offload capacity,
Yeah.
and tankers could refuel each other. Such ops may sound complex, but compared to what the British did in Falklands War, they're fairly basic.
Yeah.
The British used a dozen tankers to refuel themselves repeatedly, keeping the bomber refueled throughout all of the route. While all of the tanker fleet would not be available due to maintenance, the rest could still offload significant fuel loads just outside Britain if needed.
Yep.
With several refuelings per plane, US Air Force could still expect to have around 400 combat planes in action.
I think a more interesting video would be, could America invade Europe as a whole? I think that would be, they'd still be able to do it. But I think it would be a more interesting video. This is a great video, but they would just dominate, wouldn't they?
Practically every day. The British would really have no chance in the air.
Yeah.
Within months, the US would have complete control of the air. And thus the second phase of the invasion might commence. By that time, British ships would be mostly dead,
Yep.
even if they hugged the shores and just aided in the air defenses. British submarines might hold out a bit longer, if not being used to actively hunt down US ships. But even if British subs managed to kill 2 US vessels for each of their own, final result would be the end of the Royal Navy.
Yep.
So at around 6 months or so into the war, the landings would be mostly unopposed, except for the Royal Army defending the shores.
And the Royal Marines? Where's the Royal Marines? Come on.
6 months would be enough for US to assemble pretty much all of their active and reserve assets. In addition to landing ships, US could count on numerous cargo assets of its Sealift Command and Reserve Fleet
Yep.
in case a port is secured. US Airborne could also help, with the numbers shown probably growing with newly trained paratroopers. Getting additional heavier equipment for them, however, would not be likely, given
I think that if you take the Royal Navy and the Air Force and all that, the biggest fight the UK would have would be on the ground. The biggest, I would say, chance of survival would be soldier v soldier. But I think with the overloading of the amount of soldiers that could be placed on land in the UK so quickly, again, it's just a numbers game at that point, isn't it?
the time limit. US transport plane fleet is pretty big, and should be able to drop all the airborne troops within days.
Yeah.
US could be looking at close to 30,000 troops during the first day.
And you
close
have to remember, they wouldn't put them right into the cities. Like, there is a lot of open land in the UK as well, especially in Scotland. Like, all they would have to do is drop all of the troops in Scotland and dominate up in the Highlands, and then just move their troops down and just clear everything on the way down. Like, it wouldn't be that big for them.
20,000 more the day after. Subsequent days would see fewer and fewer troops being added, and more supplies being brought in.
Yeah.
The British would enjoy more soldiers than shown before. The reserve mentioned covers only the soldiers receiving some training periodically,
Yeah.
and the soldiers for whom some heavy equipment is stored. In an event of a total war, Britain would be using those 6 months to mobilize as many soldiers as possible.
Yeah, there would be mandatory service for a certain age, just like there was in World War II.
While they would be equipped with basically just rifles, and while their training would be less than adequate, they would still boost the overall numbers several times.
Yeah.
Yet all those soldiers may not be enough, as UK has a problem of geography. Its landmass is just too large. Its coastline is very long,
Yep.
even when taking just the western part of its coast.
That's the thing. All it takes is for the US to get one base squared away, right? In any of the small little areas up in the Highlands or up here in these islands up here, like all it would take is for them to dominate one space, or even at this point, taking Northern Ireland and forming a base. And it's just constant supply, constant every single day, new supplies coming in. It would just dominate. It's the numbers game, isn't it?
Into account, the area to be defended is huge. And what about the islands? Perfect for US to take and entrench themselves at,
Yep.
before launching further landings from them.
Yes, the
Most
Isle of
of
Man is
those-
technically not part of the UK.
These areas are sufficiently far away from the mainland that British artillery would not be much of a factor. And what about Northern Ireland? There are just too many places for US to concentrate its assault on.
Yeah.
The British would not be able to move their forces around easily and protect those islands or the Northern Ireland. So
I think the biggest vulnerability would be the amount of open landmass in Scotland and in the north of the UK. Because all it takes, like I said, is for them to form some sort of base where it's not, like, as soon as they've got a base and the UK can't touch it, like they can't even infiltrate or anything, like the supplies and the troops and the weaponry just pouring in at that point would just be ungodly, wouldn't it? And the UK would almost have to refer to guerrilla warfare to hold some certain things. It couldn't keep the usual tactics. I know as a Royal Marine, they would have to change up the tactics and adapt very quickly and start some guerrilla warfare, because that's the only way that you can counteract the classic military tactics of the Western world, right? The UK and Europe and the US. We know our tactics, and we know that guerrilla warfare, these hits and runs are the only ways to kind of slow things down. But that's the thing, right? It's only slowing things down. It's not taking over stuff. And so you would have to resort to a slowing down of being taken over more than a stopping them from invading. Does that make sense?
the islands would fall one by one.
Yeah.
Then either Northern Ireland would be taken or part of Great Britain would fall.
Yeah.
Hard to traverse overland Scotland would be an obvious choice.
Definitely.
Though that would also slow down US breakthrough as well later on. Cornwall or Devon are also decent picks, as British defenders lack room to swoop down on the US beachhead
Yeah.
from all directions. Though such areas would likely be more heavily populated by British military to begin with.
True.
Once the US manages to secure ports and airfields and brings in US Army reinforcements, it would be basically game over for the British.
True.
US would build up its helicopter force on the areas it has taken, which is considerable.
I didn't even think about the helicopters. Oh my god.
While the British have a fleet of their own to help quickly distribute its forces where needed, their numbers are small.
Yeah.
Both sides would of course be losing many helicopters.
True that.
US to British low-level air defenses and British to US fighter cover, which would continuously be flying over the important areas. The British would have only a small part of shown inventory of heavy weapons present at any one point the US attacks. While US would also not be disembarking thousands of its Abrams tanks or 10,000 of other heavy combat vehicles, the overwhelming fire support coming from various directions would more than make up for it.
The thing is, they don't even need to do this, do they? Like, I feel like, I don't know, don't want to be that person, but there's other ways to invade Britain and take over it without even having to fight too much. Do you know what I mean?
Fire support from the ships may come in form of MLR units firing from the ships rather than actual gun barrage.
Yeah.
US ships still lack long-range gun rounds. Attack helicopters are another way of concentrating
look at the
force
amount
in
of
one area
patches.
quickly. But
792 Apaches. Can you imagine sitting there in the pub in Britain and seeing nearly 800 Apaches just appear over the horizon while you're having a pint? You'd be like, well, all right, lads. It was a good one. Enjoy your last pint while you can.
again, the British are far outmatched.
Oh my
even
God.
if just half of US numbers are present. The
Yeah.
issue for the Americans would be time. As the scenario asks what can be achieved within 1 year, US would be under pressure to progress from their multiple beachheads.
Yeah.
Northern Ireland is likely to fall within the 1 year time limit, but only minor parts of the Great Britain would be overrun
1 year time limit. It'd be much quicker than that.
by the Americans during the same time
It
period.
would.
The British would put up a hell of a fight. Ground troop loss ratio would favor the British somewhat,
Yeah.
but when Air Force and Navy losses are added in, where Britain would suffer more heavily, the US would come out fine.
Yeah.
With added large chunks of conquered territory, the US could call itself a victor.
Easy.
Big-
I think if the US ever declared war on the UK, which it wouldn't, because thank God we're allies. If it did, the UK would be like, we're not going to fight. There's no point. We're just going to suffer here. It's not like World War II where the ever encroaching German line was getting up to the UK and the UK had the Battle of Britain and was forcing, and we had the numbers at that point. We had the fight to be able to hold the Germans off, and we did hold the Germans off, and we won the Battle of Britain and therefore pretty much took Europe back. With the US, it's just different. The US numbers are just the massive and the biggest. It's like being a Celtic tribe run by Boudica and seeing the Roman legions roll in. Do you know what I mean? It's just different. It's just different, isn't it? Anyways, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Great video. I'll leave a link down below to this channel. I've not checked this channel out before. Binkoff's Battlegrounds. I'll leave a link down to the original video down below. Please go over there, give it some love, go and subscribe to his stuff and all that good stuff. Great video. Let me know what you want me to check out next. Until next time, I love you all. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.